Ya Zainab, Ya Zainab, Ya Zainab.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. Alhamdulillah, today is the Ashra Zainabiyya, and it's the month of Safar, and these are the Ayam Azza, where we commemorate about the tragedies of Sayyida Zainab Salamullahi alayha. And once again, welcome on today's episode with me, your host Sakina Habib, on Youth Matters. Now, there are a lot of questions that revolve around the life of Lady Zainab. From the time of childhood up until she reaches Karbala, she witnesses a lot of hardships and tragedies, especially that were inflicted upon her beloved ones, meaning her brothers. Even Imam Hassan alayhi salam and even Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And the fact that she saw those tragedies befall on her brothers is a form of an active patience and resilience that we see in her. And even after the tragedy of Karbala, when she returns back to Medina, Lady Zainab does not give up, and she still is so grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the only thing that we hear most about her from the narrations is that she said, "Ma ra'aytu illa jamila," that I saw nothing but beauty. So I think these are some points that we should really reflect and ponder upon, and are some basic questions that we need to ask within ourselves, that how can we take certain lessons from the life of Lady Zainab in working on ourselves in terms of active patience and resilience. And to carry on today's further discussion, to enlighten us on today's talk, I will be joined by our honorable esteemed scholar, who is the head of the education research at Imam, and he's also a neurophysiologist, and he's an environmental scientist. And he has been on my program a couple of times, and it is once again a privilege and an honor to have him on board, Sheikh Dr. Mehdi Hazari. I would like to welcome him on board. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you, Sister Sakina? Thank you for having me again.
It's an absolute pleasure and an honor, Sheikh, to have you again with me on today's program. And I am really, really humbled by your presence. And inshallah, we would love to, know your views. And also, if we could have an enlightening discussion on today's topic, so everybody can, benefit from your wisdom and pearls of knowledge, inshallah. As you know that we are commemorating Ashra Zainabiyya, and there's a lot that is mentioned about Sayyida Zainab, about how she portrays the characteristics of patience and resilience especially. And when we sort of begin to think of the word patience, what are some practical actions that one can think of, taking real life examples from our lifestyles?
Yes, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, patience is a concept that in many different ways applies not only to what we would consider worship in our lives or acts that we dedicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but certainly in terms of just daily function, what we do on a day-to-day basis. And that's why even there is a hadith reported from the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salatu was-salam that there are three forms of patience. One that you show in the time of bala or difficulty or trial, and this is the lowest form of patience. The higher form of patience is the one that you demonstrate when you have to be obedient to Allah, and it may be difficult to do so. So you show patience in obedience to God. And then the highest form of patience, which is above that, is the patience shown when shaitan, wal-ayadu billah, is trying to delude you. He's whispering in your ear and trying to make you go astray, and you demonstrate patience. in all of this, I think the most beautiful description, not definition, but description of patience is the ability to maintain control over one's own self, one's own nafs, so that circumstances in life do not drag you in one way or the other. So, practically speaking, what do? You identify, first of all, the forces that are pulling you in life, whether that is your job, whether that is your children, whether that is the worries of the world, anything that can pull your nafs, that can pull yourself in a direction that, God forbid, will take you away from the path of Allah. Identifying is the first step to anything. Acknowledging and identifying that there is a factor that can affect you somehow. The other practical
Yeah.
things are many. Like, for example, seeing the pain and suffering of other people makes you remember that what you are going through may not be as bad as what others are going through. And indeed, if you ever look, you will always find that there is someone always who is suffering more than you, has worse circumstances than you do. That's a second thing. And finally, the third thing, and by no means is this an exhaustive list by any stretch, but look at the finality of where you are going. We often only look one day ahead, that how am I going to survive tomorrow? How am I going to survive into next week? And what we have to think is that if Allah allows, we will live another 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and we have to live this life. And our goal is beyond the life of this world. That's why patience has to be continuous. So there are many tools that we can employ, and it just depends on circumstances and development of the right mindset.
Yes, indeed. I really liked how you connected to the point where sometimes we see others, and when we sort of compare our problems and burdens with their lifestyle, we realize that Alhamdulillah, we are in a much better place, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easier for them and for us as well.
Yeah.
It so happened, like because of the negative connotations and the negative psychology that our sometimes our own nafs tries to have that hawas on us, yeah. So we sort of think that, oh, why is all this happening just with me? Why is Allah testing me in such a manner? And it becomes really difficult and challenging to persevere and apply the characteristic of patience. It doesn't just come about very naturally. Although Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that, He is always with the ones who are the patient ones. In Allah ma'as sabirin. But, there are sometimes situations where one really finds it difficult to, pull, yourself, for example, pull yourself out of that situation and, to see things in a more positive manner. So if we were to fall back and reflect deeply on Lady Zainab, salamullahi alayha's life, we see her overcoming challenges one after the other. So, how does Lady Zainab portray a role in her active patience and resilience throughout her lifetime?
Yeah, it's a great question. And let me begin by saying that by no means can I, with my limited knowledge or my limited ability to describe, ever come close to encapsulating what is Sayyida Zainab. We are not even worth the dirt under her feet, to be honest. And so, whatever I describe is merely me reminding myself that there is something more that I can do in her image and in her example. You mentioned her statement that I only saw that which is beautiful. Ma ra'aytu illa jamila. And I think when you talk about her legacy and how strong she was and how she maintained her patience throughout her life, and particularly in those last years after the events of Ashura, there is the story in the Holy Quran of Yaqub alayhi salam, and how when his sons come and they bring him the shirt that is drenched in blood, and the ayah of the Quran, it says, وَجَاءُوا عَلَى قَمِيسِهِ بِدَمٍ كَذِبٍ. They came with a shirt drenched with blood. And his answer to them, now imagine you are looking at the blood-drenched shirt of your son, and what sort of a visceral response a father is going to get. You cannot imagine a more sort of a more potent response that a human being could have from looking at something like this, their child in a blood-drenched shirt, and what potentially could have happened. And what is beautiful about this is that he never saw Yusuf alayhi salam. He never witnessed what happened. All he saw was this shirt with blood. So imagine now the mind that is going to conjure up thoughts, the emotions that are going to start to arise inside of a person, particularly because you cannot visualize and verify what has happened. That uncertainty is so unsettling. And so what is his answer to them? He says, بَلْ سَوَّلَتْ لَكُمْ أَنفُسُكُمْ أَمْرًا. And what does he say? For himself, he says, صَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ. He says, for me, I am going to have a beautiful patience in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, using this word jameel again, that I am going to remain trusting in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no matter what it is the environment is showing me, no matter what the visuals are coming to me or the stimuli are coming to me. And I think this is the example of Sayyida Zainab, that no matter what she actually saw in front of her eyes, visualized, she showed that the mind, the power of the mind, the resilience of faith will overcome the bewilderment of despair, will prevent you from losing control on your nafs. And that is what she showed. It was the power of her mind, the will that she demonstrated, the conviction of her faith that kept her so grounded. And I think what is the most beautiful here for us to learn is that whatever we visualize in life, whatever stimuli we receive, the news we receive, the bloody shirt, God forbid, that is in front of us, figuratively or otherwise, it creates upheaval inside of us. It creates emotional disturbance inside of us. That emotional disturbance, and I am not an expert on emotion or psychology, but that emotional disturbance creates unease that we have to quell somehow very quickly. And that's when patience goes out of the door, because we cannot stand the upheaval inside of us. So we have to either control the upheaval, or understanding that we are human, we're going to experience upheaval. We have to learn to say we're not going to allow that upheaval to direct our actions. And that is Zainab al-Kubra alayhi salam.
Yes, indeed. And can I just ask, what would you say, is the difference between being patient and resilient? I mean, for the viewers to understand in a much better way. Is there a difference, though?
Yeah, so I think from my understanding, and as a researcher, we do this work, we use the word health resilience a lot, or societal resilience. And essentially, when you're talking about resilience, you are talking about the human body or the person having the ability to resist the stress of whatever they are encountering. So it is something that you have either been bred with, you are born with it, you are raised with it, you develop it inside of yourself, and you then, when you face the stress, your body can resist and it doesn't collapse. An example of this is somebody who does not eat properly, doesn't exercise, their body will not have resilience. So if they are stressed with something, if the body encounters a stressor, their body cannot handle it and an adverse effect occurs. The same thing goes for our faith. Our faith is this way. If we have not developed our faith the way we need to, we have not embedded within ourselves the qualities that are needed to face the rigors of life, the tests that Allah places upon us, then when that test comes, when the stressor is in front of us, we will not be resilient. We will not be able to deal with it. And what is the first thing that will happen is we will not be able to show patience. So I would say for myself, resilience is a state of the body that either we have or we don't have, or we're on a dynamic scale of having more or less of. And based on that, we can either show patience or we show less patience. And that is just human nature.
Now, Sheikh, in today's time and era, we know that without a shadow of doubt, there's a lot of pressure, meaning we see a lot of pressure coming from the society, coming from our community. Um, the burden of economy, financially, as well as emotionally. There's also pressure sometimes from within our families, how to be act in a certain manner, how to be in a certain manner, what aspects to achieve in life, certain goals, like things are sort of somehow dictated for a person as well. So in that case, it becomes quite an ordeal to maintain patience. So in such times, how can we daily remind ourselves that patience is virtue, and that the result at the end will be good? And also, um, is it to what extent, to what limit should an individual stay resilient and patient?
Yeah, so patience is so critical and so necessary to who we are, to our faith, that when we talk about an extent of patience, there is no, I think, limit to that, no upper limit. We can always show more patience, and we can always be more patient, because Allah will never test us beyond that patience, beyond that sort of capacity to bear. And He knows us better than that. He knows sort of what is our innate capacity for dealing with these sorts of circumstances. But when you're talking about it in our daily lives and what affects us and what impacts us, that is something that is going to differ from circumstance to circumstance. And each individual will have to be able to understand. I go back to one thing, is that we have to acknowledge the fact that there are these factors that influence us, that change us. You were mentioning, right, that the world is full of these things that are causing problems in our life, worries in our life, put a strain on our minds and our ability to be resilient, in all honesty. So we have to acknowledge, if we don't know those things to begin with, then how will we know how to treat them or how to deal with them when they come upon us? Half of the time, we don't know the things that are affecting us, or we know they are there, we know they are affecting us, they are causing us to some degree to become susceptible, or they are decreasing the amount of resiliency that is inside of us, but we don't know how they are doing that. They're affecting us emotionally, they're affecting us psychologically, mentally, physically even, or they are affecting us spiritually. They're causing us, God forbid, to move away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in addition to acknowledging those factors, we must know what they are doing to us, how they are affecting us, and what they are creating inside of us in terms of khalal, or shortage, or deficiency. That deficiency exists in all of us. And one thing, when people ask me that, how do I deal with this? God forbid, I commit a sin a lot, or find myself to get angry in a lot of circumstances, etc. These sorts of problems, meaning it's a lack of patience, obviously. I say to them that try to identify the situations in which you are falling prey to this, in which you are becoming susceptible to this, and identify what is it about that situation that makes you become angry or commit the sin or lose your patience in any way, shape, or form. That, just knowing the situation to which you are susceptible, will create inside of you a better understanding of yourself and how you have to sort of remediate these actions.
Now that we have spoken about being patient and resilient, it is good that you mentioned we need to sometimes, identify those areas that are, causing us and making us susceptible to fall into these negative areas. Because it's true, sometimes it happens that when you resist too long, when you are patient, sometimes when you're not getting those positive results, you sort of rebel. You become like aggressive, and now you start rebelling that I'm doing everything that I was expected to do, but things are not turning out that way. So it's 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 yes, it's a good advice, as you mentioned, that we need to always figure out the root areas and all of that. But then again, I think the youths wouldn't really like understand the concept of how can we really apply this concept of being resilient and patience, even in terms of when situations are, for example, not working out. So what practical advice can you share, um, so that one can apply it very, you can say in a very like practical day to day example. What would your alternative advice be on this?
Yes, it's a great point. And so let me step back and say one thing first, that although Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks of us to be patient, it is an absolute necessity. It is the head to the body, and essentially the body will not survive. And in this case, the example is given that patience is to your faith as the head is to the body. So without the head, the body doesn't survive. You need patience. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't act. It doesn't mean you shouldn't seek to solve your problems or correct whatever it is that's ailing you. I give you an example, unfortunately, that I hear about too much and people come to me about, is when there are certain relationships in which the wives, the women, are being physically abused by their husbands. And this is not something we like to talk about, but what is worse to some degree is that when these women, when these wives go and tell somebody about it, the people just say to them, you need to be patient with the abuse. You need to tolerate it because God says to be patient. Yes, indeed, God does say to be patient. Be patient. But God doesn't say that you should tolerate injustice, that you should tolerate abuse, that you should tolerate oppression. He doesn't want any human being to live undignified and oppressed and trampled on. So, yes, you should be patient, but you should take within your hands the power. You should be empowered to change the world around you, to change circumstances for yourself. And the practical advice that I would say is, again, recognizing what is in your power to change and what is not. That in itself begins the process. So if you know that there is certain things that are outside of your control that you cannot control, then your only recourse is to pray to Allah and say, Allah, open the door for me, and until then, give me patience. But if there is something you can do, then you act, and you act without transgressing the boundaries of Allah. I would say that is the greatest form of patience and action together. That when you act, you're doing it deliberately, consciously, thinking through the circumstances that you are faced with, assessing how you can solve the problem, and then asking the important question that the solution that I have come up with, does it in any way, shape, or form break the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And if the answer to that is yes, then you have to find another way. You have to find another solution. And that is the process for us. That has to be the process. Going through a checklist, asking what is the issue, how it can be solved. Is this within the framework that Allah has allowed? If yes, you move forward deliberately. If not, you find another solution. And if that also doesn't work, you find a third solution, and on and on. That is the way we live life. But again, the problem with us is that we face upheaval inside of us. That upheaval prevents us from thinking clearly, from applying rational methods to our problems, and one, staying within the boundaries of God. Because if I can solve my problem by breaking the limits of Allah, then in this moment, due to my upheaval, I am at great risk of doing so. So, wal-ayadu billah.
Thank you. This was the point that really I wanted to be highlighted because, sometimes the concept is not really understood. Even when we say it in our lectures and majalis, people don't really understand. And I think you nailed it very well by explaining this matter. For example, you gave the example about domestic abuse that happens at homes. Yeah. And then, we sometimes tell these women, not to speak much about it. So now this leads me to another question that sometimes it also happens, meaning that when we see oppression in terms of the rights of a citizen, whereas their rights are being ignored, or your rights as a community member are ignored, or as a company employer, or perhaps in casual examples, if someone tries to defame your character for no good reason, and tries to accuse you in public constantly and such, is it wise to remain patient even in such situations and circumstances?
Yeah, so that again, it depends on the extent of what is happening and your ability to act. That requires an assessment. So if you are being mistreated by someone, whether it is in your professional career, whether it is at school, whether it is in any circumstance, you have to ask yourself that has it risen to the level of me acting or necessitating an action from me? Sometimes it does. Sometimes it does not, though. So, for instance, if it is a passing insult that has no meaning, and that if you act and say something, it will become bigger unnecessarily and there will be no benefit to it. And more importantly, if that passing insult had no meaning behind it, meaning it was just said trivially, then you can ignore those things and act in patience, control your anger, and not respond. But sometimes you can be trampled on such that it will harm you. So, for example, in your career, if you are faced with a colleague, somebody who you know, who is impacting you, affecting you in some way, in a negative way, and you feel you need to act, then you can act. And you can say something about that and recognize that there is a means for you to speak up. There is a means for you to resolve this issue yourself. But then in that moment, you have to be sure that what that colleague did to you was in fact an injustice. You have to know that their sort of mistreatment of you had a negative impact on you and potentially could have caused you harm. And then more importantly, that your actions subsequent to that are appropriate and are measured such that the proportion of it is sort of equal or parallel to what you have faced, because you don't want to go beyond that and commit injustice. So certainly it is circumstantial, it is situational, and it is dependent on its ramifications in our life. Again, the point has to be made that Allah doesn't want us to suffer negative consequences of abuse, of oppression. He doesn't say that we should live in tolerance of that. By no means should we ever do so. And again, it is just a matter of how we act and how we deal with it.
When we look at the sermon and khutbah of Lady Zainab, I'm just slightly transitioning into this. We see that the way Yazid treated her, in the darbar, and the way she responded, we see that, she did not react very aggressively. And of course, she, in that counter argument, she did present points from the holy verses of the Quran about, the verses about the oppressors getting their punishments, in the hellfire and the hereafter and all of that. But then again, there is this question that how come at that point Lady Zainab, did not act very aggressively, as in she was too patient, in such a moment after going through so much, how was it possible for her to do that? And is so many youngsters in today's time and era, especially is youngsters who are living in the West, they have to struggle with their faith and iman a lot in today's modern Muslim world, as we say it. So if we were to compare these two scenarios, what would your advice and view be?
Yes, so what can we say about Sayyida Zainab alayha salam? And again, there is no way that I can describe what she is and how it is that she did what she did. Allah has given such strength, and it is a testament to what she was and what she held within her. I can say that how did she remain so patient in that moment and give words of such eloquent? The only thing that comes to my mind is the strength of conviction, the strength of faith that is deeply rooted inside and that does not shake under any circumstance. The Holy Quran, it has a beautiful verse in which it says, those who believe, they are the ones. It describes the mu'minun. It says, these are the people who believe in Allah and His Rasul. And the ayah, it says, ثُمَّ لَمْ يَرْتَابُوا. The ayah, it says, they believe in Allah and His Rasul, but then after attesting to that faith, having that faith, they do not shake. They are never disturbed on the inside. They remain firm. And I think that's the difference between her and us, is that the strength of her faith, the power of her knowledge, and her understanding were the ones that were controlling her actions, not her emotion, not the upheaval from the loss that she had just experienced. And that's why you see that. What do we lack? We lack all of these things. Either our faith is not strong enough, or we do not have the knowledge to fully characterize the circumstance in which we are in, or we don't have the understanding to implement within ourselves the steps forward. So we find ourselves unhinged. We find ourselves floating and not knowing what to do. And that is the worst thing. So for someone today, a young person having to deal with the challenges today, you have to, one, strengthen your faith. That faith is only going to be strengthened by developing a connection with Allah, by ridding those things that connect you to this world. And to some degree, we are always going to be connected to this world. But you understand my meaning, that only through the connection to Allah do you find what is infinite, what is past this transient world. The second thing is developing knowledge, understanding the world, the circumstances in which you live, and what is required of you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the third thing is ma'rifah, understanding, knowing how it is you implement that knowledge. If our youth, and indeed any human being, any Muslim, understands and fosters and develops these things, then you will find that when the wave crashes on your head, that you will not shake on the inside. You will not feel upheaval like others will, and you will be able to patiently deal with it. That's not to say we are not supposed to feel emotion. That's not to say that we shouldn't feel sad or angry or upset or agitated. It's human to feel that. We are human and meant to feel these feelings. The beauty of belief and the strength of knowledge that it creates in you is that upheaval, that emotion, that agitation, that anger, that sadness doesn't control you and make you act without self-restraint, without discipline.
Thank you so much, Sheikh, for sharing very insightful points on today's program and for really explaining in depth the actual definitions of how can we exercise active patience and resilience in our daily lives from the life of Lady Zainab, salamullahi alaiha. As you know that there are many key relevant lessons that we can take from her life, alhamdulillah, and we are, alhamdulillah, trying our best to exercise these lessons in our lives as well. I would once again like to humbly thank you for joining on today's program and for taking out your precious time. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and give us the tawfiq to do much more, inshallah, on the right path.
Thank you, Sister Sakina, for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure, and may Allah bless you immensely for everything you do, and to the team at Hidayat TV.
Thank you so much. Ameen. Jazakallahu khairan. Thank you so much, viewers, for tuning on today's program and for being a part of this enlightening discussion. I am very thankful to Sheikh Dr. Mehdi Hazari, who has joined us today's program. And inshallah, let us try our level best to, exercise active patience and resilience in our lives, because times are getting very challenging, and every day, we see new scenarios. So it's high time how we can figure out how to tackle these certain obstacles in our lives. Thank you for tuning on today's program. This is your host Sakina Habib signing off. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ya Zainab.